Welcome back to the core. We've been speaking about biblical family life, precisely the father's role. Last we were together, we talked about the fact that the children look to their fathers to learn what it means to be a man. That is both the little boys and girls, sons and daughters. The son looks to the father for what he should become. The daughter looks to the father for what she should be a part of, what she should marry, what to look for in a man. And that's why it is so important that we project that image. And we were talking about the fact that the father is a figure, an image. And we used that reference to the Greek word tupos, which is an indelible mark or a stamp. And so children become what they behold. As we know, there's the old adage, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And that can be applied to good and bad, because children see things, they learn things, they emulate those things. And so we have a lot of work to do, because if we have bad fathers, then we need to reprogram our mind and our image and what we've seen. We need to go back into our data files of what we have observed in the life of fathers that were not exactly biblical, and make sure that we do not follow those precepts or those ideas that they emulated to us. In other words, the things of our past. And see, some people go deep into the realms of what they call inner healing, and going back and dealing with your past traumas, etc. It's a lot easier to just simply know the truth and let this truth set you free. And the truth is that Heavenly Father that we know is a good Father, and He's an example for us, and so we follow His example as our Father. So the figure now of the father, the children are looking, they watch the father to see how he treats other people, his conduct. They watch the father to see how he treats his wife. So young men are learning how to be good husbands. They're watching how the father treats the other brothers and sisters, where they're learning to be a good father in the future, etc. So as we've seen all that, we know that also this father figure is a spiritual leader in the realms of prayer, Bible education, church participation. We see that he's mentally stimulating to the children. We allow our children to express themselves and to speak, and we enjoy the intelligence of our children. I thank God He's given me 3 extremely intelligent children. All of them have very high IQs, and they are very educated, not by anything that I have forced them to learn, but by their own choices. They're curious about things, so they learn, and I've allowed them to be free to do so. And physically as well, we as fathers give that example of good health. So now we're going on in our book. I want us to turn where we are seeing now the father is a friend. So many fathers are so busy with the affairs of life that they become detached from the life of the children. I'm talking about friendship between the fathers, not just paternal. It can also be fraternal. And as far as us as fathers, we can also be a very close friend to our children as men with our sons and our daughters. So a pattern is seen or set early in life of the children before they are weaned from the mother, even because of the constant time spent with the mother. The father gets used to leaving the children with her, and therefore does not share an interest in them. And this interest should be established from before the child is even born. And I say this because I believe it. Because there's a cultural issue that we have to contend with here, where I write that in many cultures the understanding is that the mother is to deal with all the problems of pregnancy and then labor and delivery of the child. And we have this image, of course, of the father out in the waiting room, and then smoking the cigar, saying it's a boy or it's a girl, and that seems to be his sum total of participation. But it goes a lot deeper than that. And if we're going to be good fathers, it starts the same way. If you think of our spiritual father, right, and we establish the fact that He's a sovereign God that loves us, our Heavenly Father knew us before we were born. Jeremiah learned, as the Lord told him, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. I set you apart before the world began for a purpose. And so God was telling him that he was formed, and He knew him, and He had a plan as his Heavenly Father before he ever existed. So we would like to be able to say that for our own children. If we're going to really serve this purpose of being an example, right, then we also need to show a great deal of interest and be this image or this example to our children as their fathers even before they are born. So before our wives carry our children and the children are born into this world, we should already have a vested interest and a concern and a passion in the child before it ever begins. And so this is the problem. In many cultures, the understanding that the mother would do this can be counterproductive. And I think it's wrong. We need to always be there. So after these mothers have to raise the child up to a certain age where the father can become involved. In other words, like a weaning stage. But I think this is wrong and establishes a pattern of non-involvement that creates a disinterest in the father toward the development of the children. They seem to always want, if it had already been the mother's responsibility, then just give it to her. But I personally believe that she's done her part through 9 months of being able to carry the child in her womb. And I would, of course, I've always envied my wife that she had the ability to nurture this life inside of her. So I feel that it is my responsibility to do the very best that I can for my children. In later years, the father may find it difficult to change the pattern if he does not involve himself even from before the child is born. So a good father will be involved in every aspect of the child, in the life of the child from conception onward. The husband that is expecting a child should use the 9 months of gestation as a period of learning about being a father. This is a time to take responsibility of fatherhood seriously and focus on the child's future. In other words, a time that we count the cost. I remember when we were married, we were expecting to have children, and I was excited about the potential of having children, but we had 7 years of marriage before my wife became pregnant for our first child. And during those 7 years, we grew together. And it's a very good thing because when we were married, we were very young. I was 18. My wife was 17. There were literal papers of emancipation that had to be signed by her parents. In one regard, it's like I had adopted my wife, but I was only less than a year older than her. I was 18, she's 17, but we got married. And God gave us, by His grace, 7 years for us to develop together as a couple, to learn one another and to learn to live until our first child was born. And it was always my desire to have a child, and we were not stressed, but of course everyone else was worried about us being incapable of having children, but we knew that the Lord had a plan. We've always trusted the Lord like that, and we've leaned not on our own understanding, nor were we concerned about any kind of infertility. We trusted. And when the time came, the time was right, my wife became pregnant, and we had our first child. And it was a very exciting moment in our life when that happened. And when I found out the news, I remember it sobered me up from what was my normal life of being just a husband of parents without, or a couple without children. So we weren't parents yet. But when I heard the news, I got very serious and I went to the Word of God. And I had 9 months basically to prepare myself to be a father. And it's the same with a mother, has 9 months to prepare herself to be a mother. It's a kind of time that we count the cost. And I say that during that time, and even before the pregnancy, we should be praying. And prayer for the child is very important and can affect the future of the child. We see many biblical examples of parental intercession by fathers. Abraham spent a lifetime preparing and praying for his son Isaac. He didn't yet know him by name, but he was certainly believing the promise that was given that he would have a son that would be the heir to this promise that God had given to Abraham, that he would make him a great nation and a great people, and he would multiply him like the sand of the seashore and the stars of the sky, and he would be a blessing, and nations would be blessed through him, and whoever blessed him would be blessed, whoever cursed him would be cursed. We all know the promise. But that promise took a long time to come to pass, and in that time Abraham was praying for his unborn son. The father should attend the birth of the child very closely. And actually I say this comes back to the time of pregnancy. One of my favorite books when my wife became pregnant with our first child was a book called What to Expect When You're Expecting. And it was a great book. I mean, I lived through that book. Every day we read it together, and I was excited. I would listen very carefully, put my ear to my wife's stomach and try to hear any sounds the baby was making inside there, waiting for movements. And as the months went by, it was so exciting to see the belly growing. And I remember the first time I could see the belly move as the baby was moving and began to kick, and there was motion, and it was so thrilling to me. And when the time came before birth and you could actually tell what was an arm or a knee or an elbow, those were exhilarating times of excitement to me, in anticipation of the fact that I'm going to be a father to this child that is coming. And I believe that the children prenatally experience these emotions. I believe that the children feel that love and that nurturing before they're ever born. And I used to speak to my child also. I used to cup my hands on my wife's belly and say, "Hello in there, I love you." And I would pray and sing songs, and was always very excited about the birth of my children. And it's important that we have that kind of focus, that kind of nurturing. We want to bring a child into a realm of attention and concern. And the father and the mother together honestly should share the care of an infant child. The raising of the child should be the father's job from the very start. This establishes a bond between the father and the child that will never be broken. You understand that kind of development and togetherness of the raising of the child from the very beginning binds the father to the child. And I was that kind of father, that I liked changing diapers. And my wife had the job of nursing the child or the children, and my wife had, of course, the job of carrying the baby for 9 months, and I stood side by side with her during that time. And when the delivery came, I was there, present, to help to care for the baby. In fact, our first baby we had it took place in a hospital, and we had a doctor. He was a Christian doctor, but he kind of didn't listen to our wishes and did some things that we had already decided we did not want to take place in the birth of our child. And one of them was an episiotomy, which we had decided that she should naturally have the baby 100%. She's never had an epidural, but the first child, the doctor, against our wishes, appeased my wife, and her body shook and she went into shock, and it caused what would have been a more natural birth to be a little more difficult. And her body was not in stress. The doctor, I think, was simply in a hurry. And so it made me really, really angry at doctors overall. Not that I'd had a love relationship with doctors before that. So then I vowed, no, the next child, we're going to need to take matters into our own hand. I hope it works out that way. And sure enough, it did work out that way as we became missionaries and we were on the mission field. And we had our first child at the end of 10 years of ministry, actually, that I was in ministry. So we married and 7 years went by, and we had moved down to southern Mexico to the city of Acapulco, where we were living in El Coloso. And in El Coloso, my wife, that's where we brought our child. When we went to plant the church down there, our first child was 6 months old. No, I'm sorry, 6 weeks old. Only 6 weeks old. We'd had the baby, and immediately, because we had the baby in the U.S., immediately we went back to the mission field to plant the first church. And it was a very exciting time. And it was just me, my wife, and our firstborn child, totally alone, not connected in any way to any other believers or churches. We were completely in a pristine environment, apostolically planting a church. And it was a great time for us as a couple with a baby to grow together. And we had this time separated to be there with our first child. And that's my firstborn, Anthony James, or Tony. Now, a couple of years went by, and my wife became pregnant for our second child, who was Michael. And because we were living in an area where it was bad enough I didn't quite trust the doctor or the medical profession, this was a very low quality medical environment because of this area. It was a very poor slum type area that we're living in. I was very apprehensive of anything to do with any kind of medical care that was provided there. So my wife and I beforehand had prepared and obtained a birthing kit and went through instruction and learning on how to deliver a child. We read many books, and we were prepared to do a home delivery And sure enough, when the time came, that's what we did. Our second child, Michael, was born in our house. And this is a great opportunity for me, a very emotional experience, for me to be connected to my son. And that's what I'm talking about, the father connecting to a child before the child is even born. So my little toddler, 2.5-year-old Tony, was with us. And my wife, as she went through her pregnancy, came toward the end and she went into labor. It was time. She had chosen where she wanted to have the baby, which was in our bedroom, in a chair, wing-back chair. And so she is a strong woman, so she wanted to kind of be in control. Her firstborn, actually, after she had the first baby, about 3 hours after delivery, 3-4 hours after, she was like, I want to go home. And so she got up and showered and we left. And she did that for our third child, also same way, just like an hour and a half after she had the baby. She's like, I want to go. Now, my second child also, right after the delivery, within an hour, 2 hours, she was downstairs making herself a sandwich. Very strong woman, strong character, strong mind, strong body, a wonderful woman of God. We'll talk about her later when we get into women in the scriptures. The Proverbs 31 woman, my wife has checked off every box. Now, go back to the delivery of the second child. There were some problems. Some people say, well, if you have a home delivery, is there any issues? What if there are complications? Well, God is very, very broad and great in His majesty and His grace toward us. And this is a very odd story, but we were about maybe a month before the delivery of our second child, and we were sitting downstairs, and my 2.5-year-old son, Tony, came down the stairs. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he turned slowly and eerily, I might add, and stared at us. And he had a little half smile, like that, kind of creepy, honestly. But we were like wondering what he was doing. And he looked at us and he reached up his hands, put them around his neck like this and said, baby, okay. And he did it a second time. And he said, baby, okay. And now when he said that, I felt a very strange feeling come over me, and I felt like the hair stand up on edge, and just a very peculiar thing for a 2.5-year-old to tell me. So I was wondering what this might mean. But anyway, he went up the stairs again, and we just kind of kept it in our hearts and our minds. Fast forward a month. My wife goes into labor. She's upstairs, and the baby slowly is moving. She starts to dilate, and as the baby is being born, finally, the baby's head crowns. Now, it's just me and my wife there. That's it. And also my son, who was in and out of the room. He was playing around in the house between contractions. I would make sure he was okay. There was no one in the home except for a neighbor who could come when it was necessary. But as my wife was delivering the baby's head crowned, and then the baby's head was delivered and the baby stopped. Now, at that moment that took place, I had this feeling. Now, I am there on my hands and knees. My wife is in the chair and she's having the baby, and I see the baby delivered to the neck, and just the baby's head is out and it's not coming further. And then I have a vision in my mind, and in my mind I see again from a month before my son standing on that staircase with his hands around his neck saying, baby's okay. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me. Now, when we talked about hearing the voice of God, I told you that sometimes it's audible. Well, I heard an audible voice, and the Lord said, the baby is okay. And the Lord said, take your small finger from your right hand and insert it at the 6 o'clock position of the baby's head to your wife. And I did that. I put my finger right inside my wife, below the baby's head. It's kind of graphic, but this is amazing. The Holy Spirit said, do that. When I did, I remember as I got inside past the tight orifice where the baby was coming in the baby's head and neck, I felt a bump or something in the way. And then I felt my finger slip past that around it. And the Holy Spirit said again, hook your finger around what you feel. And I did. Rotate your hand around, clockwise around your wife's body, and I did that. And as I did, where I was holding on to whatever was in my finger, it rolled outside from inside to outside. When I got to the top, it was like a tube, and it flipped over as I got to the top, going to the 12 o'clock position downward, and went to the other side. As soon as it did, the baby shot out in my hands. And it was kind of like an explosion. Boom, the baby come out. There was, all the fluid, the amniotic fluid sprayed out. I'm one of the few people on earth that can tell you exactly what amniotic fluid tastes like. It's salty sweet. And it covered me. And I know that sounds kind of gross, but if we want to talk about being involved with your child's birth, I'm going to tell you that I couldn't possibly have been any more involved. Of course, the baby was fine, no problem. Supernaturally, God was with us there. I remember when the baby popped out, my 2.5-year-old son was in the room staring at us. And he looked at me, and he looked at his mom, and he looked at me, and he says, "It's a dinosaur?" And he wanted to know if it was a dinosaur, and I have to give you a reference to that. This is back when Jurassic Park, the first movie, came out, and there was the moment where the eggs broke open and the little baby dinosaurs came out. Well, that's what he was referring to. He wanted to know if this was a dinosaur coming out, and because that's all he'd ever seen, even close to that, was the little baby. And I said, "No, it's not a dinosaur." And I have the baby in my hands, right, and the umbilical cord, and he's looking at me. "No, it's not a dinosaur." And right then I picked her and I looked between the baby's legs because we had not known the sex of the baby. I saw that the baby was a male, and I said, "This is your brother." And by then the baby, I didn't have to slap the baby or anything. Michael came out strong and crying. Wah, wah. So then I cleaned the baby up, wrapped in a towel, gave the baby to my wife, and she held the baby while I had to go back to work to deliver the placenta, or the sac that was inside of the baby's, the thing connected to the baby as nutrients. And everything went fine. The baby was delivered. I cut the cord myself, and it was a great, amazing experience. What it was is this beautiful circle of the fact that a man and a woman fell in love, got married, and had a child. And this child being born from the fact that I was there in love with my wife to impregnate her, and she conceived this child, and I was there at her side for 9 months, and I was there with her when the baby was delivered, and I did the delivery myself, and I was there with the baby from the time he was born until the time he was about 22, 23 years of age, when he was married and then moved on to the mission field. For all that space, I was fully there. Of course, I'm still there with my son. I regularly talk to him, and we love our children. But the bond there, you can never take that bond away. We are deeply ingrained in the lives of our children, and our children in us. And our children know that they will never lose a place in our life and our hearts. Right here in our home, they are always welcome at any time. And I thank God for the opportunity to be a father to that extent, to that fullness. And I recommend to any young man to not be afraid of the process, not be afraid of birth. Even if you could go as far as to do a home delivery, I absolutely recommend it as a beautiful experience. Or at least use a midwife. When we had our third child, 11 years went by, and now we're in our 40s. So my wife was 39 or 40 when she gave birth to Sarah Jane, our third child. And of course, I was there in the room. Actually, I did that delivery also, but with the assistance of a midwife. And what was nice about that is, even though it was in a hospital, a private room, when the baby was born, and I put the baby on my wife, I was there holding her hand right next to her and petting her head as she took care of the baby. And the midwife did the delivery of the placenta, etc. And we cut the cord and everything was done. It was just a great experience. So I was there. I attended the birth of my first son. So for all three of them, I was right there in the process. The second I did completely on my own. The third, a midwife assisted me, but it was a great experience. I recommend it. Now, some people are a bit more squeamish and they might not have the desire to do such a thing. That's fine. There's no condemnation, but I found it only enhanced my role as a father and my participation in their lives. And I think it's really a great blessing to be able to do that. And so there, from that point on, the raising of the child is the father's job from the very start, and it establishes that bond between the father and the child that will never be broken. And the second point there is that as the child grows, the father will find opportunity to be more than just a teacher and a disciplinarian. He also become the friend of the child. And if the above steps are followed, then this is quite simple and even unavoidable. So the father should get down on the level of the children and play with them. The father should be the provider of fun. Now, I would say that in this realm of providing fun for my children, I have excelled through the years. And I'll give you my philosophy about this. There are a lot of people who want to invest into permanent things. And when I say permanence, I'm speaking of the earth in that regard to these people. They want to invest in physical things that will last. But I have found it more advantageous to the development of the mind, emotions, and heart of a child to invest in the moments of life, to invest in quality times, to invest in participating in activities. And as a father, it is one of the most important things I've ever found is to find that thing that will cause you to connect to your child as a parent, as a father. I've always had to look for what is the thing. There has to be an activity. There has to do something we can do together, something that I can nurture and be a part of. And for each child, it is different. For my first son, and the way that we dealt with each other and related, it was different. All of them enjoyed playing video games, and so I participated in that level. I made sure that I had the advantage of that is I've always been a child, and I still am a child. Here I am at 53 years of age, and I have an extensive collection of Legos. Just yesterday, I was in the store looking at the Lego shop and examining what's the next set of Legos that I want. I particularly like the Star Wars series of ships and crafts, and I have the big supersized ones, you know, the highest level of them. And there's a new A-Wing fighter that's out right now that I'm really excited about. And then there's also the Rebel cruiser that Princess Leia escaped in the beginning of episode 4. There's a Lego model that is beautiful. And even just this past birthday, May 6th, I was given as a gift the Millennium Falcon, the big, large one. So always being a lover of those things, I invested into that for my children. Whatever they wanted, including Legos, but also video games. I made sure they had every video game system there is. I made sure that it was my little boys, that they had what they wanted, that we had guns and bows and arrows and all those toys they wanted. I loved going to the toy stores and finding those things, and being a father that played. I would get down on the floor. I remember when we had our first child and he was just learning to walk and run around. I was so interested in ministry that the realm of playing with the child was a little less enthusiastic for me. I was a little less enthusiastic concerning that. And there was a visiting pastor who was at my house, great father and great grandfather of children, and a real example in that realm. It was Brother Scott Hornsby. And he came to our house and he was sitting with me talking, and I had a million questions about ministry and what's next, this, that, the other. And my child, who was just a little toddler, was daddy, daddy. He was asking me things, and I kept shushing him, like, no, I'm talking right now, I'm talking. And I kept on pushing him away. Well, after a while, it started bothering Brother Scott. And he just looked disturbed. And eventually, he leaned back in the conversation, he folded his arms, and he looked at me, and he gave me a word. And the word was this: let me tell you something. He's kind of a forceful man. I liked him. I loved his brother Billy also. Great man of God. And he pointed at the baby in the living room, pointed at the child and said, see that baby? See that little boy? He said, you have this moment in his life only now. Only now. Today is here today, and then it's gone forever. Now, I sensed that he was a man speaking out of memories and remorse for maybe moments that for his children, that he was over-focused on the ministry and should have spent more time with them. And I took it as a word from God. And I said, okay. And immediately I got up from the table. on that very moment, and I got down on the floor and played with my child. And he joined me, and we played together with my son, and he asked questions about him, and I answered those questions. And it was important that a mentor tell me that, someone that could help me and give me that input, and I listened to it very carefully. And God has given me many what I call minor mentors. I have major prophets and minor prophets. I have major mentors and minor mentors. Well, Scott was one of those minor ones. In that moment in time that I needed to hear that exact word, a word in season, to alter the course of my life. And I made a commitment and a vow to do that, play with my children. And so I did from that moment on, as soon as possible. I remember justifying buying a Sega Genesis video game system for my 2-year-old child. So I had that game system for my first son. Of course, I did all the playing. Sonic the Hedgehog in the beginning, had a great time doing that, and I learned as I went along. And I had friends that also had little children. They came to visit me. We had a great time together, and we talked and became good fathers. And that was always our mission, be the best fathers that we can be, loving our children. And it's good if you become a father that you surround yourself with other fathers and you guys work together, and that you all have the same passion and the same drive to be really good fathers. It's helpful if you bring the children together in play groups with other fathers, and you'll be there. And you know, the funny thing, I was never a sports person, so I've never nurtured in my children the love for sports. Sorry if it disappoints people. I never really liked football or baseball or hockey or soccer, or what they call football on this side of the world, and never really cared. So therefore I didn't really play that much with my children. But we did have a trampoline, and we did have guns, and we did have BB guns and shot targets. And when we were in America, of course, it's not legal where I am now, but here I just got fake guns. In fact, we would go buy Nerf guns, and the colorful ones, and we would spray paint them matte black to make them look like real guns. And it was a lot of fun, and we would pow, 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 shoot each other, and kids are great. I remember there was some issues too about, well, as a parent, you should not teach them these violent things. It's in a child's heart, especially a little boy, for them to conquer and fight and battle and do these things. I remember hearing a funny story I was in a family seminar, marriage and child rearing seminar years ago, and it's important that we learn these principles from others. And the man was talking about he and his wife deciding once that they would nurture their children and never let them have guns. His wife did not like the idea of the violence of guns, and so he agreed reluctantly, and he wanted to play with them with little pow pow pow, and so anyway, long story short, they leave the children in the kitchen one day where they're having breakfast, and they step out and they're doing some things in the house, and they hear noise coming from the kitchen. Pew, pew, poo, 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 I got you, cute, cute, cute. And they're thinking, how are they playing with guns? And they went in there because they knew they had no toys in the house that were guns. Well, the children had taken their breakfast toast and chewed it into the shape of guns and were shooting each other. And that teacher said, it's the day I realized that it is in the instinct of a child to want to be a warrior and a fighter. And not that they will actually literally be a warrior, but that those principles of a man's protection of his family are inherent in him. He wants to guard and protect and keep safe, and that is that soldier mentality, and to defend. So as a father, of course, I never had qualms about that, nor the violence in video games. And a lot of people would say, as a father, should you be letting them play these video games? It's going to engender violence. The cases that it causes children to be violent are simply with cases where they have no real father present. There's no balance. In other words, fantasy becomes reality, and the fantasy of the video games plays out in the reality, but they have a clear distinction with you as a father of what reality is and what the practical existence of true life is versus the fantasies of the games. I grew up with Star Wars, and I loved watching the movies and all these science fiction movies, but I have always distinguished between fantasy and reality, and that is because of God's presence with me. So it is when a father is present, that is the image that is given to the son or the daughter, and they can know that. Being good fathers. The father is absolutely a friend. Now, that segment being complete, we're going to go on talking about the Father. Now we see that the Father is a founder, laying the foundation through different realms of his life. So the father-son relationship is the mentoring process. And I want to talk about that by first visiting this scripture. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart, keep my commands, and you will live. Now this is a beautiful section of the Bible talking from the perspective of a father to his sons. And I want to discuss this and break down this passage about the father-son relationship being the mentor process. And that's all we've been talking about in this course is mentor discipleship. But mentor discipleship is just another form of paternal oversight of someone. A spiritual father, you will not have many fathers, you'll have more teachers, but anything in the mentor realm is a father type that is leading, guiding, and giving an example, or a mother type. But here, speaking in this realm, the father being a founder, he is a mentor. That we are there to teach by example in many places and also explain things. And this is where it starts out here in these things, breaking down Proverbs 4, 1 through 4. Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. Now, there's a difference between instruction and understanding. In other words, instruction is the lesson itself, the teaching time. Like, for instance, I can sit here with you in these classes called the core, and I can instruct you for hundreds of hours, as we are actually doing. We can do this, but the knowledge of it, the understanding, comes from the application of that knowledge. And so this is what the father, in the very beginning, is telling his son. Listen to a father's instruction, pay attention, and gain understanding. So the acquisition of the understanding takes place as he puts into practice. So the father teaches the children the image of the Father God and instructs them on how to live their lives. The father is to help the child know understanding. This means that the child must be taught why things are done and why not. And not just the fact that a thing should or should not be done. The child must learn to reason. And I've always done this with my children. I've already shared the story with you in this series about the knives. I'll retell it in brief in case someone watched this segment without that story. But my children, my boys, were always fascinated with knives, and I gave them a law. And the law was simply this: you do not play with knives. They didn't have an understanding of why they shouldn't play with knives. So I used as an object lesson a raw chicken that my wife had in the kitchen sitting on a cutting board. I brought the little boys into the kitchen and I said, see the knife? And their eyes lit up because they were fascinated with these knives. And my wife had these big sharp knives, and I made sure before it was super sharp. And I said, first I put the knife to the side. I said, hey, come see this chicken. And they saw the chicken, and I had them touch the chicken. I said, you feel the bones inside? They moved the leg on the whole chicken. And I said, isn't that amazing? I said, look at your hand. Your hand is the same way. And they saw that. Then I took the knife again, and I went, shoom, and I went through the chicken and just severed the leg, cut it right through the meat, through the bone, through everything. And they looked, wow. And then I said, give me your hand, with the knife in my hand. And they put their hands behind their back, and they were afraid. Oh, see, that's how I taught them reason. I said, this knife can take off your hand. This knife can take off your finger. From that day forward, they never again wanted to touch a knife. To this day, they have a very healthy respect for knives. After that moment, when they would walk in the kitchen and see the knife, they would look away from it. Why? Because the understanding of the knowledge is the teaching, don't touch the knife, but the understanding is important. We need to always strive to do that as teachers to our children. As fathers, also as mothers, we need to give them understanding. We need to give them the reasons for rules. Second thing there is, I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. Now this is interesting. Good doctrine is the right way to be, we know. So every father must lay down laws in the home for the children to adhere to. A lawless environment creates a lawless child. In other words, later in life, they will not respect laws. They'll do whatever they want. And of course, this will lead to destruction. This will lead to being punished, because we live in a land of laws. We live in a world where there are laws and rules. So every father has to establish within the microcosm of the home, as a founder, the laws. We are the law of the home. What dad says, what the father says. And if the mother is there, what the mother says. And basically, though, as a founder, the mother simply upholds the laws of the father. So the mother is kind of like the police force in the home, and the father is the judge and the sentencing. And so we work as a team, father and mother together, to be able to do that. That's why often you'll hear mothers say, just wait till your father gets home. But she will arrest the children. Go and wait in your room. So they're under arrest, but they have yet to be arraigned and then tried and sentenced. And all that comes into the father's realm as a founder, and that is in connection with the counsel and the co-counsel of the mother together as we work. But we need to understand that as we teach them the things of life, we need to lay these foundations, these laws. There has to be limitations. And if we let a child just do whatever a child wants to do and run wild, we're doing a great disservice to that child, because inevitably that child is going to meet authority somewhere. And it may be in a bad environment. It may be arrogant speech to someone that will shoot and kill them as a result, or slap them or beat them, and it'll be a more aggressive learning process. If you teach them early on from the simplest processes of the ramifications for misdeeds by being a good founder, then they'll understand this. As he says here, that for I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live. So we see that in verses 3 and 4 in that passage. For I too was a son to my father, and still tender and cherished by my mother. In other words, you see both the father and mother together. The mother doing the cherishing, but the father there is an oversight. And he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words. So we give words, we sit down with them, we take the moment to explain things to them. So we see that the father learns to create fathers here. And this is the ever-reproducing pattern of the mentor relationship at its best. Why are we mentors? We're mentors to recreate ourselves, be imitators of me. And so I can say to my sons as they were growing up, be imitators of me. Look at me. Watch me. How do I treat other people? How do I treat your mother? How do I treat you? And you go on and carry these lessons forward. And if you show those lessons and you teach it in words, explaining why things are done, then they connect reason to the words and the laws, and they carry these principles in their life as they go forward. And a good father produces good fathers. So even if we had bad fathers on earth, God is the best father of all, and then he will make us good fathers as we were mentored by him, and by good fathers, of course, as we covered earlier in this lesson on the father. So we can only reproduce in our children what we are already. It has been said that there are no such thing as bad children, only bad parents. Maybe you've heard that before, and I would have to agree with this. I think there are some rare exceptions. And maybe it's because there are exceptions to this rule, or maybe it's because there's a lot of things I cannot see, but I have seen family units with fathers and mothers of children, and they seem to be the best father and the best mother on earth, doing the very best they could for a child, but later on that child becoming the worst person you could ever meet, getting involved in drugs, etc., on. And we'll talk about that later in child rearing, but likely it was connected to bad influences outside of the influence of the father and the mother. But we know that a good father produces good children and good fathers. So a bad child really is the responsibility of us. I would take, if my children are bad, if my children do something wrong, if my children say something stupid, I take responsibility for it. I think it reflects on my parenting, and therefore I need to be ashamed. And I am. And we'll talk more about that as we go into further realms of understanding this. But a good father produces good fathers. And my boys are good fathers. They love their children very much. And it's so funny because exactly as I did for my children, when I go and visit my sons who are now both fathers, I see myself in their homes, sometimes quite literally. When I was recently on my last trip to Japan, when I was with my son, Michael actually stayed at his house and slept there in his living room. Japan, the apartments are very small, so you sleep on the floor. It's still okay. It's great. In fact, most people do sleep on the floor. But in that particular case, I was there with them, and in my son's home, a great deal of the home was a realm in which his son could play. That's Logan, my grandson. And he constructed out of a box from a refrigerator or something, kind of a home or like a castle with doors and another room. A second box was connected to it like a room, and they put inside there an iPad, like a television, and he could go inside that house and dwell in there. And I remember I did exactly the same thing from him when he was that same age. We had some boxes, and I constructed an entire castle fort type thing inside of our living room in Mexico, and painted it and drew the bricks with magic marker, and it was a big fort or a house with doors on it. And we would go inside, and we would always make tent houses with chairs. An easy way, fathers, if you're listening to me, is you take regular kitchen chairs and you put them across from each other with the backs of the chairs away from each other, and you line 3 or 4 of them up. Underneath then are rooms. I used to put 3, 3, 1, 1 and have 7, 8 chairs with the backs of the chairs facing out. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then one chair there with a hole in the center going up to the upper chairs, right? So you have a downstairs and you have a second floor where you could go up, climb up there. And then I would cover the whole fort with sheets and blankets, and that would be there. Of course, it makes kind of an eyesore in the middle of the living room for the moment that you're enjoying this castle that you built, but gosh, what the memories it puts inside the child will last forever. I had a great opportunity last year with my daughter. See, now my sons are there, so now I'm fathering my daughter, spending time. I look for reasons how, when, where can I spend time? How can I connect? She's a very private person, as all my children were, and she has her own world, and she loves drawing, she loves what she does. But I had a great opportunity because of blessings came to my life. I was able to have 1-year season passes to Universal Studios theme park here in Singapore. And what a wonderful time. We would go every week, sometimes more, and spend the entire day from open to close. If it opened at 10 a.m., we were there at 9:30 waiting in the line to get in. If it closed at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., we would wait. They would have to throw us out of the park. We would do that about once a week on my off day. And what a great time. We became park masters. We knew how to get to every exhibit of the 20, 21, 22 rides that were there. We knew how to get there quickly, how to get in quickly. We'd do the Jurassic Park water ride in the single rider queue, which means you could skip all the line of people that were waiting and go to the front, and they basically would fill you in the spots that were available and empty. You could do that in the Transformers ride also. And we had such a great time that year. And that was a bonding moment through that entire year. What a great investment of time, space, energy, build castles in the house, whatever there has to be so that you can connect. And in those moments, that's when you're able to give these teachings. And I too was a son. Just Father's Day just passed, and although my father was not there much, he was there at least at one time, or a few times that I remember, and it made a difference. And that's what taught me. It's the little things that matter. Make sure you pay attention. I say to you what was told to me, and maybe you are a father, maybe you have children. You see that child? You only have that child at that time, that moment in time for today. Take advantage of it. So be good fathers. Now we're going to take our break here, and we'll come back after and continue on with the father, and we have a lot more to cover as well.